Okay, great. Thank you guys for joining. Obviously, this is a strange time, and I think the best thing to do is to try and not let pundits and talking heads and politicians and reporters and everyone speak for us, and not us have an opportunity to talk to each other. And so that's sort of what the thinking is behind this. And I'm using a system that I've developed for 2.5 years called EPIC, which is going to allow us to sort of go through the conversation in a way that's organized and structured. And the first part of EPIC is the E, which is equalization. So we don't start talking about race right away because these conversations require a little bit of vulnerability and comfort. And the worst way to be vulnerable with each other is to talk about the thing you probably have the least in common first. So we shift that slightly down the line. And the thing about equalization is sometimes I have to search for it, whether it's, what number of siblings are you? That's sort of like, what is it that we all share in common? And then I realized we all have a pandemic. So it's actually made it very easy because we all are going through a pandemic. It's very strange for me to be able to say, oh, I know what everyone in the world is going through at this time, but here we are. So I'll ask you just sort of briefly about your pandemic situation, where you are with your family, is everyone okay? And that'll sort of warm us up to each other, the way we talk, stuff like that. So Laura, how are you doing in your—
I'm good. I'm good. Yeah, I am in Southern Oregon. Grace, you didn't hear earlier when we were talking before you came on, but I'm in Southern Oregon, right above California. And I live with my wife, and we have a 17-year-old son. And then we just took in two foster boys, teen foster boys, in the last couple of weeks. So things are a little crazy with that. What's that?
What ages?
15-year-old and a 19-year-old. 19-year-olds kids can actually stay in the system till they're 21, and he's going to school at a university here. So we're able to kind of support him through that. And yeah, so far it's a pretty cool experience. It's only been a few weeks, so it's all new, but yeah.
And Susan, how are you doing over there?
Good. I'm in northeastern Indiana. I grew up in Indiana, but have lived several different cities, Fort Wayne for the last 11 years. Since I got married to my husband, it's just him and me, and 5 nieces and nephews that we're really close to. Both of our families are actually within about an hour of us right now, which is pretty much the only reason I'm still here, because I hate the weather. Back to that cold thing. Yeah. I hate it. So someday we're going to move south. I keep saying that, but the pandemic, like, as far as it's impacted us. We are the second biggest city in Indiana, but we're also in Indiana. So, we've seen nothing like these large cities, metropolitan areas, especially on the coasts. So we're kind of more just hearing about it and trying, not to make it worse, but it's not doing a ton for us. We did have shutdowns and stuff, but we're probably about half open at this point. So I'm starting to feel some semblance of normal again.
Great. And Grace, on your balcony.
Hi. Yes.
How's your pandemic situation?
It's been, going generally well. I have an 11 and a 6-year-old. So doing school, with working full time was an experiment that I would hope to not have to repeat come August. We're in Southern California, so we're, pretty locked down. It's starting to open up a little bit now. So yeah, but just like our entire week is pretty much consumed with like working full time. Both me and my husband are still working full time from home. So that's it. And then our kids are kind of just like doing whatever while we're working, because they're technically done with school.
Yeah.
This week was our first full week, I believe. Last week was our, so I said, oh, we're going to continue school during the summer, but who am I kidding?
Oh, it's really, really good.
That's
So let's talk a bit about the world, about what's going on around us. I guess, Laura, let's start with you. What is it you wanted sort of to have this conversation for? What is it you're looking to either understand or talk about some more? What is it you're looking to gain from this?
I think for me, I want to learn how to become a better ally to the Black community. We are very, very white here in Southern Oregon. I will say that. There is not a lot of diversity here. I mean, we have a large Hispanic population, but otherwise there's not a lot of diversity here. We had a multicultural fair that I attended for work, and all the booths were very white. The performers up on the stage were all very white, representing art forms of other races, but it was sad, honestly. So, I mean, I grew up in Southern California, I grew up in Riverside, and so I grew up around a more diverse culture, different people, but I don't feel like I really have a good understanding of other people's experiences, and I want to understand that better.
Great. And Susan, for you, what was your thinking behind wanting to join this?
Yeah, just, seeing everything going on and just wanting to better understand. I'm someone who kind of wants to figure out what's the root cause and how do we address it. And I'm very action oriented. So I actually struggle seeing the protest because I want to do something, but I feel like I don't feel like I'm helping by holding up a sign. So what can I actually do? And I've actually had really good conversations with other friends who have sort of helped me see that that's not doing nothing, that's showing support, but just really wanting to better understand what is actually happening and how can I do something about it. Instead of just watching it or listening, like you said, to the pundits, or just seeing a lot of people just repeat the same thing over and over again on Facebook. I get it, but what are you doing about it? This isn't, you're not solving it by just putting a bunch of stuff out there. Let's do something. So.
Yeah. No, and I think very, very, very valid question. Grace, what for you, now I asked you to join this, what for you is sort of a best case scenario of this? Because obviously there's a lot going on, a lot of conversations, a lot of people talking at each other. What would be a best case version of this conversation for you?
Yeah. Best case scenario would just be it's really hard and understandably hard for anybody to know anything but what they've gone through and their own life. It's really hard to kind of bridge that gap.
You were saying, it's very hard for people to understand things that they haven't experienced. So
exactly, and so just to better understand, I feel like people would less likely kind of dismiss or kind of look at negatively, whenever you see someone super angry right now, because it's really easy to get behind and support the peaceful protesters and to support everyone that's doing the marches and stuff. But when someone sees someone that's so angry during these protests, a lot of times it's kind of off-putting almost, and people are why is he so angry? And so I think it would be really helpful for people to understand where the anger is coming from. And you don't necessarily have to agree with the outcome or what they do with that anger, but just to understand the anger and the background, I feel would be really helpful for people.
Yeah, and so let's segue. The EPIC system, the next step is personalization. So I'm going to have Grace talk a bit about her experiences, what she's seen and experienced herself. And then you guys are what's known as information gathering. So think like a detective, asking questions, drawing things out. But I'm finding that the most useful way of having these conversations is for people to talk about their firsthand experience. Not, I read this stat, I read that stat, I read this stat, and those conversations don't really go very far. But this is what I've actually seen and experienced myself. So Grace, if I can ask you, in terms of, let's talk a bit about the anger and the frustration. It's a big question, so go over, what is it in your experience that you have seen or experienced that can help us understand what this is all about?
Yeah, so I have actually been super fortunate where I don't know if fortunate's the right word, but I grew up in a largely white neighborhood. So I don't even have the same reference as some other people, but even with that, um, I was treated differently at times from a very young age. And the first memory I have of the racial divide that I grew up in Pittsburgh. And Pittsburgh then, like it's very different now. I've gone back to visit, but Pittsburgh then was black and white. Like there was nothing else there. And probably when I was about 6 or 7, me and my siblings and my cousin were coming back from a ceramics class that we like to go to. And there was a car that drove by and slowed down, just, you know, slowed down enough for someone to be able to yell out of their window, like, go home, niggers. And we were like 6 to maybe 10 years old, just like walking. That was like the first kind of thing. And I was like young enough where I kind of like didn't fully understand, but as I got older, like of course that memory stuck with me, and it kind of like hurt more like as I got older than when I was younger, especially as an adult now, and just thinking about the mindset of an adult that would say that to kids is just kind of beyond me. There were times where even my really close friends, their families would say something like, oh, well, you know, it's fine. Like we love Black people, we love you guys, but like to date someone outside of your race, oh, it just brings more hardship on the relationship than is necessary. And I'm like, and I could not understand that, because in my head, I'm like, if you love people and you love someone, I don't understand how you can encourage someone else to like just like keep their like I don't know, I felt like they were as much of the problem without thinking that they were as someone that was like openly sorry. It's beautiful. Yeah. Okay.
Before you got on, my kids came and there was a whole incident over graham crackers.
Yes, I will, I promise. Okay, she drew a painting. I'm really sorry.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Beautiful.
Beautiful, they said. Okay, sorry.
We're all when people talk about the frustration that's going on right now, as being a few bad apples, some bad people, some bad choices, what are your thoughts about that in terms of what you've seen and experienced either through you, your husband? Like what do you think when people say that?
About the protesting there being like a few bad apples?
Yeah, like there's a few bad apples. The police, the people screaming N-words at you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Are exceptions to the rule.
Yeah. It could be like, okay, but even if it is, I found that like it's very wrong for Black people or any people of color to take their few instances, even if people want to use the argument of, oh, it's a few bad apples, it's the exception to the rule. They think that it's wrong for us to take those exceptions to the rule that we've encountered time and time again and use that as a base for how we feel. But if it's the other end, I've come across so many white people that say, well, I knew a group of Black people whenever I was younger, and you know what they did, and this is why I feel the way that I feel. Or I lived in a neighborhood once, and there was this one house, and it was full of drug dealers, and they were all Black, and so they used these experiences that they had, these exceptions to the rule, as a base for judging everything else. But then we're not supposed to do that.
Mm-hmm. Mhm.
And I don't understand the double standard there. It may be exceptions, but we're using that for almost everything.
Yeah.
So
And you and I spoke. We were talking when I was asking you to be part of this, and you have two daughters, and you were saying, I don't know if the word was "thank God I don't have a son" or "I'm glad I don't have a son right now."
yeah,
Can you explain why you were
yeah.
why that came out?
I mean, it's not even right now. It's
Mhm.
every time I hear something, I have to thank God that I don't have a son, and that's like heartbreaking, really. Um, Especially because like most of the time, whenever we were, um, having kids like in the beginning, and people are like, "Oh, you're not going to try for that son." Of course, people are always like, "Oh, the boy and the girl," and then you're definitely done. You can be done, you know. And so there was even times where we were like, should we try for the boy? All of that stuff. But like for me to count that as like a blessing from God that I don't have to do that, because like even for little Black girls, it's super hard because like they go through identity things very early on. My 6-year-old is wondering why she can't have hair that like lays down and is pretty, because she considers that pretty, and why she's the only one with brown skin. And so like very early on, girls deal with identity, um, not fully loving how they look, because everyone around them looks different. And so that's a struggle. But just to having a little having a son that's Black creates a whole nother like emotional like struggle for moms and for dads too, but moms more because we're like, our babies. And it's just it's very hard, and it's teaching them that you have to be different. You have to act different. When you're out in situations, you can't be yourself. You have to make sure that you are acting better than everyone around you. Because if not, you're looked at worse. If you're acting the same, you're just looked at differently, and that can lead to so many bad things.
I have a lot of friends, and I don't know, Laura and Susan, if you know this, that I don't have a single friend, a female friend who's Black, who doesn't have the talk with their children at a very young age. One of my best friends, her kids are exactly the same age as mine, and she's like, I'm probably 2 years, which means 6, away from that talk about this is what happens if police come near you. This is what happens. This is what you do. Laura and Susan, have you ever heard of this, the talk that Black parents give their children?
I've heard of it. Obviously, not something that ever would occur to me to have to do with my son. So it's crazy to me that anybody needs to. But
it's
yeah,
crazy, but it's a right. It's a sad rite of passage that every single parent will tell their Black sons, more specifically than I think daughters, that if a police officer shows up, this is what you do. You do not run. You do not tease. You do not play. You make your hands evident. You do not reach for anything. It is a very early conversation because it happens so often. There was a thread on Facebook. Someone posted, a friend of mine, what was the age you were when a police officer first pulled a gun on you?
Mm-hmm.
And hundreds of responses: 9, 12, 6, 8, 13. Like, it was crazy. It's still there. I'll see if I can tag you guys in it. But it's people saying, I was this age, and that was the first time a police officer pulled a gun on me. And I don't think there was anyone who was above 15 on that. Like, no one's age was 18, 21. It was all 16 or below, all people of color. And I guess what the bridge I'm trying to build now is because one side is saying, this is a huge, huge systemic problem for us. And the other side is not aware of it, which is not necessarily their fault.
Right.
But when it's brought to their attention there's a lot of refuting, which again is also okay in theory. But what I find really hard for the Black community is when people are like, no, it's not a problem. It's not a problem at all. And that's where I feel like I've heard it so many times, and I'm neither Black nor white. So I sort of watch this thing unfolding in front of me, and it's gone on so many times for so much of my life, for every Black friend I know, no matter where I've lived, that I'm like, this is a real thing. This is a real thing. Now, it's not every person, it's not every police officer.
Mhm.
It's enough of a problem that it starts to feel like this is a system. Grace, can you talk a bit about that, and maybe
Yeah.
your husband's experiences and all, just because it tends to focus more on Black males than it does on Black females?
Yeah, for sure. One of my first experiences, kind of just being like fully aware of it, because I am a Black woman in a largely white neighborhood. My brother has had to have like the conversation with my dad like a lot earlier, and all of that. But like for me personally, I was dating it was my first boyfriend, and I started dating really at a later age. So I was already driving, and so he had to teach me kind of just how to be more aware of my surroundings. So whenever we're driving, I even do it now because it's become a habit. Like I'm constantly picking out and watching for where the cop cars are and if they're following us, and if they are following us, like how long they continue to follow, and all of that. If a cop car passes me going the opposite direction, I instinctively look in my rearview mirror on my side to make sure, or to see if they're going to do a U-turn. And that's kind of something that he had to like walk me through and teach me to do, just because we would be like driving late at night and even in the daytime. And that's something I had to learn to do.
And Laura, Susan, I had asked you guys to possibly take a look at the documentary, The 13th, which was for me very illuminating in terms of connecting dots, because a lot of the time I would think, well, that happened a while ago. Slavery was a while ago. The civil rights was a while ago. And I was like, oh, then it connects and connects. What were your honest impressions to it? Like, sort of, what were the things that you didn't know? Were the things that surprised you? Were the things that you're like, I don't know if that makes sense? Like, what were your honest reactions to it?
Yeah, and honestly, I didn't get the chance to watch the end of it, but the thing that had the biggest impact for me was talking about that initial movie that they made, and how that drew that depiction of Black men being violent,
The birth of an
and that insidious planting of that seed in our minds, that from as far back as I can remember, those are the images that we see. And it's just crazy to me. I mean, I think that had the biggest impact to me, is just having that realization that so much of what's put in front of us is a false narrative, and that it's so deeply embedded through that.
My family's an immigrant. I wasn't born here. I was born in Pakistan, and we came here. I remember growing up in Baltimore, and I remember every night on the news the parading of the Black teenagers who had been arrested for crack, or the references to super predators, or the references. And I remember my father being very afraid of Black people, because again, for coming from Pakistan, there's no exposure to them. He'd actually worked in Africa, in Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, and had no problem. But here in America, he was like, oh, it's different. Like, there's something very dangerous, very violent. And I remember him being very concerned about Blacks in general, because all he saw was that news. And it was every night. There was no Cosby Show at the time. There was no, it was just that was the only depictions we got. And I remember that I remember having the impression myself. Susan, what stood out for you, or what made you think, or what would you like to ask about?
The one statistic that probably stood out to me the most, I actually kind of got teared up when I was telling my husband about it, was that 97% of people in prison pled out, and that only 3% actually had a trial. Like, I can't reconcile that because we have a system of, our justice system is having a trial, you know, and being judged by a jury of your peers, you know, I mean, it just, it made me sick. I can't even really fathom it, because even just at 3%, they were saying, you know, people have to wait years for a trial. So I know that a lot of the people that plea, you know, to get a lesser sentence, and it could be because there's a lot of evidence against them, but there's no way that's 97%. So that's actually, I wish they would have gone into a little bit more detail about more statistics on just like how many of them, you know, was there, you know, pounds of evidence on, and how many of them said, I didn't do it, but I guess I'll take this because it's better than the 25 years I could get. So for whatever reason, that one like really, really stuck with me and really sickened me. It just seems like a really big perversion of our justice system is that most people, you know, plea out of having to do a trial. So
even
that's the big one for me. And then just all the issues with the prison system, you know, the justice system, the prison system, the trial system, all of that, everything going on with, and I have known that, like that just, you know, people that commit minor crimes end up getting turned into hardened criminals because we put them in prison for a ridiculous amount of time and we ruin their lives. And I knew the part about not getting to vote, which is atrocious also. I don't understand why that's even still a thing if you've served your time. So there were some things that I knew, but I think just learning more about how many people are put in prison and how many of them don't actually go to trial was just shocking to me.
Or even the idea of bail. You know, the amount of people who are sitting in prison right now
because they don't have it.
Because they don't have bail.
Yeah.
You know, and anyone who is middle class can walk out. Do you feel in your communities, in your families, in your social circles, do you think as things are unfolding now, and this is an earnest question because I'm not in Oregon right now, and are the people around you seeing this as, wow, this is a real problem that's coming to light? Are they thinking this is over exaggerated? What are people around you thinking and feeling about what's happening right now?
It's interesting for me because I have a real mix of both liberal and conservative family and friends, and so it kind of splits down party lines, honestly, unfortunately. So I say that, but I'll also say that it feels like a turning point, and it feels like people are taking this serious in a way that we haven't before. I mean, I still definitely have people who are saying, yeah, but, and giving all the different reasons. But for the most part, I think most of my family and friends that I'm seeing are really wanting to see change, and they're realizing that this is a big deal and that it's time to actually do something about it, not just keep talking about it.
Mm-hmm. Susan, for you?
Yeah, I don't know that it's anything different. This is the first time that my city that I can think of in the 11 years that I've been here that the police had to use tear gas on a group of people. I mean, again, I cried driving through my city the next day because we don't do that. So there have been several peaceful protests, but there were 2 nights of pretty extreme violence that I've never experienced anywhere that I've lived. So I will say that was different. But as far as like the conversations, I agree with Laura that it's just you're split. It's just the normal people that are split, you know. And I do think I have heard a lot of people that are like, I'd like to talk about it, but I don't know who to talk to, because if I talk to this person, they're going to yell at me for this. And if I talk to this person, they're going to yell at me for this. And I can't really find somebody, which is why I reached out to you, Riaz, because it's like, I was like at my wit's end. Like, I can't ask a question, you know, no one will just talk about it. And I have honest questions. And so I think there are more people wanting to have honest conversation, but I was talking to a friend last night and I said, there's just so much yelling. I can't get a word in edgewise. There's just so much yelling, you know, figuratively and literally. So
I feel that, and I feel like everyone seems to be an expert on what to do, but everybody's opinion is different. So it's like everyone.
Yeah, and I think the other issue that I've talked to people about is it's not simple. You know, we want to make it simple. We want to make it just a sentence, and then everything is better. it's not simple. This is complex. It's there's deep roots on both sides, I mean, and just undoing all of that and understanding all of that is gross and difficult and sad and scary and all of these emotions. It's not simple, but a lot of people don't want to delve into the complexities. So
Yeah.
Grace, did you want to respond to that?
Oh, no. I I was just agreeing. It is grossly complex and difficult. And so a lot of times I have to like stop myself from being cynical because I call myself a realist, but some people call me a pessimist. I think it's a realist. But I have to stop myself from being so cynical because like I get to that point where I'm like, I don't think people understand how deep this goes. And how are you supposed to fix this by like you were saying, like holding up a sign? And I had to like completely, I have to literally consciously like tell myself, no, whenever you see someone holding up a sign that's supporting something, they are doing something that they feel like they should be doing. But I know how complex it is, and I know how deep it goes for like so many people, that it's just hard to kind of wrap my head around what people are trying to do. And I think we need to do something, but yeah, it's big.
So can I ask?
Yeah.
I was going to ask a question, Grace, of like, during your lifetime and like your husband's, and you said you had a brother, do you feel like there are things that have gotten better, things that have gotten worse? And like, what do you feel like maybe personally feel like the causes of each are? I know it's loaded, but.
Yeah. I unfortunately don't think it's gotten better. I know that I'm supposed to say that it has, but I honestly don't think that it has. I think that there's probably more support but just because of social media, there's more support. Because before, you were kind of isolated in your own town, and you had people that were like marching alongside you and with you, and you had people that were willing to be your friends, and they stood by you and all of that. And so it seems like there's more support, but I think only because of the sheer numbers, because of social media. But there's just still too much of it going on, and I feel like it's still so brutal. Like there are still people in the South that are getting lynched. Like it may not be every day or every week, and there may not be like crowds of people crowding around to take their picture, but that doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It's still happening. Like, so yeah, the sheer numbers, more support, and probably less everyday occurrences. But I mean, that doesn't, so hold on, sorry. Yes.
Oh, it's so hard to do that.
Sissy, can you ask Sissy to do it? Okay.
Thanks, Grace. I know you're juggling.
It's okay.
So can I ask a question real quick? Is that okay?
Yes.
So Grace, from what you're saying, I was just wondering, from what you were saying, does it feel like it's more of a superficial progress that's happening then, as opposed to more of like a deep?
For sure. Yeah.
Because is that kind of what you're saying?
Yes. And the superficial is nice because like, you still, makes you feel good, but it makes us all feel good, and it should, because change is change no matter what, no matter if it's superficial or deep. But but just because of, like, I always tell people like that are having like their first baby, I'm like, it took your body 9 months to expand. Don't expect it to like go back like in 3 weeks, And so this is like 300 years of, of this, like, And then we honestly, there is a system that was built to act accordingly to how it's acting. Like there's our entire country was built on this system. So man, it's just so big for like actual change. And I think that, you know, the superficial change is great because, you know, you can only go one step at a time. So yeah, it'll be one step at a time, but I know that a lot of people in my circle are like praying for like serious change in our lifetime. And because I'm a realist, I'm keeping the faith, guys. But it's just it's that whole like this has taken this long to build up to this. So you know,
I think
how long will it take?
One of the things, because I've traveled extensively throughout America in the past 2 years, having conversations like this about all sorts of topics that people don't want to talk about. And I'm like, let's talk about abortion. Let's talk about immigration. Anytime people want to run away, I'm like, oh, let's talk. So, and what saddens me is when it's a party issue, because I do like, and I do follow a handful of Black conservatives. I like Lawrence Jones, who's on Fox, Gianna Caldwell. I like there being different approaches to solving the problem. And I do appreciate that, because I think sometimes it's been like the liberals have the solution, and yet things don't necessarily change. So maybe we could try another alternative or try another idea. So I have no problem. And a lot of my friends don't necessarily have a problem with conservative ideas being brought to the table. It saddens me when it goes to the conservative filter that it's sort of the problem itself goes away, and that either it comes through the channels or the media, and that's where I feel like it becomes like this wall that we can't seem to get past, because it doesn't. To me, the problem I see so often is that people will say, I feel very bad for Grace. I feel bad for her not getting her rights. I would like her life to be easier. But I'm not interested in a socialist version of the economy.
Yes.
And so Grace's rights are going to be sort of put on hold, because economically, that's not what I think the government should do. And I hate when those get married, because there is a problem, and it could be approached in a variety of ways. But when we marry the human rights to the economic interests, no one's going to go above and beyond what they think America should be just to give Grace a better chance at life. But they don't have to be locked in together. But they're always pitched as, if you want to help the community, then you're slippery sloping into a very progressive socialist version of America and government. And that makes people run away from the cause. Whereas this is a human rights thing. It should be separate from how our economy runs. And I feel like that's a way that a lot of conservatives leave the conversation, is because they want to help, but they're not interested in shifting or flipping the way the government in America works. And I wish those two could be separated, because allies in the conservative side are very useful and very important. And I think new ideas of solving this and approaching this are very important, because some of the old ideas have not worked. We've tried them for decades, they're not working. But when everyone tries to marry the human rights with a bigger version of trying to shift what America is, they jump off support. And I think that's why it breaks down along party lines. Grace.
I was very surprised, because I didn't draw the connections in watching the film 13th. I didn't draw so many connections that that they kind of pointed out. And when I was watching it was kind of like an aha moment, but I never connected the dots like that. But
what was the aha moment? Aha moment?
Yeah. So whenever I was saying how the whole system is in place for exactly how Black people are treated, whenever slavery was abolished, and then they were like, you have this whole section of America that is now in collapse because their economy was on the basis of having all of these people working for free. And so the fact that they can then convict people of a crime and then get that free labor back was kind of like, like one of those evil genius moments that's like, of course, this is the answer. And so you see this picture of those kids, like 8 years old on a chain gang. I mean, it's like, hello, like the entire structure of the American economy is tied to that. So it goes back to like how deep rooted it is and how like I don't know how to get to that change, because that's what the entire economic system was built on, making sure that Black men were convicted of crime and can now work as that free labor. And I was like, that's genius. It's evil genius, but yeah, but that's the whole thing.
For me, I couldn't believe when I was watching video of convicted people in jail now for profit prisons making products for Victoria's Secret for free labor. And I was like, wait, how did that happen? How did that become a drive of the economic force again, for profit prisons, which now are moving out, thank gosh. But for a long time, the more bodies in there, the better.
Yeah.
And that was such a strange, perverse concept that I didn't know about. A for-profit prison system is a strange thing to have existed for so long. And I didn't know anything about it. And this idea of like free enslaved labor making products, I thought was a thing that had disappeared 100 years ago. And I was like, oh no, it's the dots still connect. And it's things like, I was talking in one of these conversations yesterday with a guy from Baltimore, and he said, this area of Roland Park, where was very close to our school where we went, was all founded in this way of writing leases or deeds that wouldn't allow Blacks to own land. And then banks wouldn't loan to Blacks for whatever reason. It's a personal loan, and then they wouldn't. It's like all the ways of getting out, moving up. There's like one or the other, just sort of like it keeps coming down. And even now, there are communities that, that when the Black family moves in, the real estate agent's like, oh, this is going to change, the profile of the community. This is going to change the overall house values. That stuff still exists. And I think it is so complicated, and it is so all inclusive that it starts to feel so completely overwhelming.
Yeah.
What's interesting to me now in terms of, again, social media is the awareness. And then I was watching the documentary LA 92 about Rodney King. And at that moment, when the police officers were arrested, you saw them beating this guy and beating him and beating him and beating him. And again, in 92, no one had cell phones. And the only reason this was captured on tape was because it's LA and everyone works in entertainment. And so this cameraman had his camera, and so he filmed it. And so you saw them get arrested and all these riots. You're like, okay, something's going to happen. And then the trial was moved from downtown LA to Simi Valley, which has 97% white population. And everything was done to make sure that there was no conviction. So I think the concern is that we have this moment, everyone's in the streets, there are charges against these officers, but what's going to happen once we all go back to our lives? Is justice going to be served? Are they going to have a fair trial? Are the union going to step in? Is it going to be moved to an area that's easier? There are always these system things that come in that don't allow justice to be served. And I think that's the frustration I hear from my Black friends, is that when will justice be served in a clear, consistent, fair, even way? And so there's awareness now, but will the changes last? Will people be interested in this in 2 weeks? Will they be interested in this in 4 weeks when the next news cycle comes up? How do you get people to be invested in a cause that's not necessarily theirs? That doesn't necessarily impact their lives. And you have very compassionate people wanting to help, but getting other people to say, no, this is not just some Black people in some areas. It really is a systematic thing trying to keep an entire population down. And we're not the only ones. My in-laws live in South Africa, and it's still struggling to figure out how to equalize a system of apartheid. And they can't quite figure out how to do it. But it requires a lot of thought, but it also requires both parties and trying to get the other side to say, this is important. maybe it's not as huge as they think it is, but it's still an important issue that we've never quite dealt with. Like if you two were to go and talk to your conservative friends, what do you think their responses would be in terms of what shouldn't happen, what's the reality of what's happening? What do you think their feedback would be about this kind of a conversation?
I think most of my conservative friends actually want to have the conversation, but they feel like they have to be, and this isn't just conservative either, but just like, I have to either be way over here or I have to be way over here, you know, and it's like they're committing treason if they're not, you know, like hardcore. And I mean, I struggle not just with, I mean, I'm pretty much a libertarian, and so I don't really fit in with either group of my friends, but I do struggle with feeling like, you know, if you're not hardcore on one side or the other, you just don't fit in, and that's where you're not having conversation. But I am feeling like I've had several friends kind of say, I just wish we could talk about it, but they have that struggle. Like if I try, I just get lambasted from both sides because I'm not hardcore enough. So I think the politics, even though we need to deal with it, I just don't think that's where it's going to be won. I think our community is, and that's what I want to ask too, is like, so from a community perspective, from a police perspective, you know, faith perspective, like what are the steps that we should be taking to start this? Because I'm not waiting for my politicians to fix it. That ship has sailed.
That ship has not sailed. It's still stuck on dry deck.
Yeah, that's true. I guess that's the problem, isn't it?
It never sailed anywhere. It's been for 20 years. If only it would move to water. I mean, I'm Grace. How do you feel with it? Because I feel like I'm also losing faith in government, specifically federal big money politics to do anything right.
Yeah, they won't. And I honestly, I don't think that it's their job to. Like, granted, they got us into this mess, but it's not their job, I feel like, anymore. Maybe they could have stopped the train as soon as it started, but at this point, like, they're out of the equation completely. And I feel like, and I love whenever corporations talk about what they're going to do and all of that and advancement, and all of that is great, but I honestly believe that it starts with one-on-one relationships. I honestly believe, and this is something that's like huge in my church. Like, it's very easy for people to say, oh, I belong to a multiracial church, because all you're doing is showing up on Sunday, sitting beside someone that doesn't look like you, and then you're walking away. It's super easy. But the minute that you start sharing your dinner table and your life, and your kids become intertwined, and they share life experiences, and just sharing your life with people that don't look like you, that's what it is. And it's not going to happen any other way, because then you get into this area where it's no longer like, oh, well, I once lived in this neighborhood and this one house was full of drug dealers. It's like, no, my kid's best friend, we're super close with my kid's best friend's family. I know them and I know their family, and it becomes a bigger network. And I feel like that's the only way, because otherwise it's too far removed. Everything is too far removed. And I know that, like, the police, there's so many issues there, but it starts with that. Imagine if all of the police, like, their barbecues on the weekend consisted of like this multiracial mix. Like, they wouldn't come with a pretext of like, I was just shot at by someone with your skin color, and therefore now when I approach the next person, I'm gonna have this mindset of I'm gonna get shot at again. And it's not like that, because you know that your neighbor and your best friend is also that same skin color. that's it. Like, that's the only way. We have to get to the point where we're sharing our life with people that don't look like us.
One of the reasons why I try to have these conversations is I think one of the biggest things, 1,000% I agree with you, is the humanization. Because for so many people, especially if you happen to live in a very white area, I mean, that's not a problem inherently, but it doesn't come across your desk, your life, your home as much. And I find libertarianism very fascinating. I obviously spent a lot of time in conversations with Glenn Beck about it, and really do see a lot of inherent worth in it. The only problem, and I would say this to Glenn, is that when you have the average white man saying, just leave me alone, let me just live my life my way, he has a certain amount of rights there and a certain amount of humanization that if we take 5 white people and line them up, generally everyone in the population will be able to tell them apart. There's a concept called racial blindness, that if you take 5 black people because they're not in the majority, or 5 Indian Pakistani people because they're not in the majority, they tend to look like each other. It's why people are saying, is that person so-and-so? I'm like, no, that's my other Korean friend. And it's like, because your eyes are not trained to the subtlety. But what that means is that this subtlety of humanity often is lost in that, because one group happens to be a minority, and there are less of them on TV, less of them in your room, less of them in your classrooms, less of them in your coworkers, and the other is saturated. So we see them. It's like people ask me, I tell people I know about Christmas because I live in your world. You don't know as much about Ramadan because we don't live in my world. We don't live in Saudi Arabia or Pakistan. I'm fine with that. I'll tell you about that. But I hope you're intrigued or interested. And so there's almost an extra effort required of the minority to say, look, this is who I am. These are what my needs are. This is what my situation is that you may not know. But then it requires the interest of the majority to say, oh, that's important for me to learn. And not just, and I found a lot of my libertarian friends would say, we just want hands off. And I'm like, I totally hear you. But the hands off to a black man is very different. There's certain protections required to preserve his basic rights, as opposed to the basic rights that are inherent in generally most white people who walk around America. And I think that humanization is what's often lost. And that I agree with you, that's everything. Because then it's not about blacks, it's about all these people who happen to be black. And then but if you don't have that day-to-day access, it requires somehow arbitrarily to make those connections, which is why I'm dragging you all together, is because, and then what I'll do is when I finish this is I'll create a chat thread for you guys, and you can say, oh, here's this article. Did you see this? I saw this came across. Because if you don't have that direct conduit to another person that you've chatted with, it's very hard to get that perspective. It's not your fault that it's hard. It's just hard. And so I really want people to be able to have that connection. The more familiarity they have, the more it becomes less of an issue.
Yeah. It's just when you were talking, I remember when I was about 8, my dad our church growing up was in a neighborhood that was majority white, I would think. But it was a majority black church. Well, he was there late one night, like fixing something. And I later found out that he came home bloodied and bruised and everything. He had gotten jumped by a group of white kids that didn't think that he should have been there for whatever reason. And I didn't have the luxury, or it didn't even cross my mind to then say, white people jumped my dad. They hurt my dad, and therefore, like, I have to treat all white people differently and with a certain thing, because I loved, like, my best friends were white. The people that, like, everybody in my life was white. So, like, but if that happened to a white person, because they go back and they live in their white neighborhood, they then have that luxury of being like, I now am treating everyone that I encounter with that skin color that way. And so just taking that kind of, that away from yourself, that you do not have the luxury of just blindly treating everyone a certain way because of an experience you had. If your life is now intertwined with people of that skin color, you don't have that anymore. So, yes.
Yes. No, I think that it would be hard for me to label all white people the same, because I couldn't even imagine doing that. Like I just was surrendering it in so many ways. Like I couldn't blanket them because I live amongst them. Whereas it's a lot easier for people when they don't to do that. I often find that, if I remember doing a roundtable in Ketchikan, Alaska, with a fisherman who was conservative, and I remember asking him, "What is it you fear most?" And at that point, I think there's still all sorts of laws that could be imposed on fishing rights and all. He says, like, I just want the law of the government to leave me alone, just to leave me alone, to let me live my life, to do what I want, to live my life, to marry who I want. That's all I want. Is I just want the government's force taken away from me. And then I was doing a roundtable in Washington, D.C. With an African-American man, and I was asking, what is it you really want? He's like, I just want the arm of the government, as enforced through law enforcement, to just leave me alone, to just let me live my life, and to not have this constant force being pressured. And I was like, you guys just said the exact same thing. You literally said the exact same thing. Your dream need is to be allowed to just do what you want, assuming you don't violate laws, and just be allowed to live and let live. The needs are not antithetical between a conservative poor man living in rural Alaska and an African-American man living in inner city Baltimore. They're not that different. They're spun to be different. They're spun to be antithetical, that one is against the other, but they're not. They both don't want the overreach of the law coming in their face and getting in their business and impeding their rights. Both sides want that. They just have been told that they're enemies. And there's a lot between them that they can connect on, because they want the exact same thing, the ability to live their life without the interference of the law every minute of their lives. It's the same on both sides. And unless I happen to have these conversations in Alaska, I'm like, wait a minute, they're saying the same things. I'll be in a mosque and someone will be like, why is the modern world so full of sex and violence? Why can't there be more tradition? And then I'll be in Texas with Christian conservatives who are like, why can't there be family values? I'm like, you guys are saying the same thing, but you think you're enemies because you're a Muslim, and you're saying the same thing, which is why I keep trying to connect people, because if you actually talk to each other, it's not that different. It's really not that different. You want prosperity, you want your family to be safe, you want your kids to have a future. How you think you go about it could be different, but your goals for your families are not that different. Your goals for your communities are not that different. Yeah. But you never cross paths with each other. And the problem I'm having now is algorithmically, you will never cross paths with each other, because everything you like is determining what is shown to you. And the whole system is very simple. We want more likes, so you buy more stuff. That's it. It's not wrong. It's literally, I'm just gonna give you more stuff you like, so you like it more, and then you buy stuff. I'm not gonna give you an opposing point of view. And I'm not gonna say, okay, here's someone else's point of view that you don't agree with. And so unless we make these arbitrary efforts, we are drifting. And you just see information streams are so separated. And like yesterday, I think I sent it to Grace, Candace Owens had a very strong take on what was happening. I generally like Candace. She's a bit of an opportunist. I know her personally, but I was like, okay, I appreciate what she's saying. But I also think Candace, coming from Connecticut, where she experienced racism and her family sued the school board, is not really relatable to most Blacks I know in the inner city. They don't like her experience. For her to say, I am the voice of inner city Black men is not really, that doesn't land. Her ways of solving things, her not wanting to make George Floyd a hero, I can hear that. I can totally hear that. But it allows people to say, see, there's not a problem. She just said there's not a problem. Mm-hmm. And everyone wants that source that they agree with, and then they cling to it. And they're like, well, this Black woman just told me it wasn't a problem, so it's not. And then anything that Grace feels is negated. And I think that as our sources of information separate, our ability to say, hey, did you even hear this? Did you see this? What do you think of this? Is gone, is really gone. And that's the biggest danger I have, biggest concern I have, is not being able to say, what did you hear? Because my side is going crazy about this. What did your side hear? And they're so separated. They're so separated. I know the Candace Owens video has, I think, 70 million views. And most people I know who are progressive or liberal have never even heard of her. And I'm like, you should. Yeah. The streams don't ever intersect. And that's hard. It's hard to talk about common things when the streams of information are so different. And like you're saying, Susan, it's the extremes. You're either on the extremes or you're consumed by the ends. The middle is is not interesting. It's the loud size at the end that get the most ratings, the most money, the most fundraising. If you're loud, you get the most. If you're angry, you get shared. If you're nuanced and thoughtful, who's like, you have to see this, they're nuanced. Like, it's not, it doesn't get people excited. And so having these conversations is important, because I think, Grace, when you say like, just that everyday exposure is what's needed, but I'm looking at my life, whether it's places I lived or communities or Ivy League schools, and the representation's just not there. Like, they're just around. And that's hard. That's really hard.
Yeah. I've been teaching my kids, like, you need to be open. Like, you need to be the Black person that your white friends can ask questions to, because there are a lot of Black people that, like, if you ask them a question, because they've been through the life that they have lived, they are automatically defensive and they put up a wall so fast. But like my 6-year-old, she came home from school and she was like, everybody always wants to touch my hair. And I'm like, you let them touch your hair. Let them touch your hair.
That's so sweet.
Like, because like, even in 2020 in Burbank, California, little white girls are just fascinated by Black people hair. Like, they just are. So I'm like, no, you need to let them touch your hair, because they need to be able to like feel safe enough to like wonder and ask questions and like get to know what it is, because otherwise it's just the imagination that takes over, and then you just run with whatever you come across or someone tells you. And so Susan, if you need my number, your friends can always ask me whatever question they want.
Can I touch your hair though? I do love the hair.
You can, yeah. This is only half mine, but you can still touch it.
Oh.
Let's shift to the collaboration, which is the last step. What can people do? What can people do now in terms of trying to do something concrete, helpful, thoughtful, informed? Grace, I'll start with you. What do you think people can do that would be most useful in this moment?
Yeah. Like I said before, I really feel passionately about like integrating your life with other people. So it's not so simple if you don't live in an area, or if you're not already kind of in that space to do that easily. So even if it means like finding out about a community rec center that's not in your neighborhood, see if they need volunteers. Like, see, well, once you can do that, once they open back up, like, see, because I feel like even as young Black people who live in a Black neighborhood, seeing a white person there that's not there to like look at you differently, and they're not there to like even some things can like kind of be off-putting to them, like, oh, here's this white person that's like here for a day to like do this. But like, if you commit yourself to actually like being there and getting involved with them and just talking to them, like even that for them who live in a majority Black neighborhood and everyone around them is saying that white people are not for you. White people do not care about you. You know, it goes both ways. So even that would be helpful even for them. Just like, yes, getting involved with young Black people, big sister, little sister type deal, even just doing that and just making sure that it's just not someone that looks like you.
Laura?
I was just going to say, it's, you know, I've kind of, my thought process has been along those lines that I want to know more Black people, but there aren't any here. Not none, but I don't have contact with a lot of Black people. And it feels almost disingenuous to go, oh, I want to be your friend because you're Black so I can get to know you better. It seems like the wrong reason to come about this. So I don't, I guess that for me is the hard part, is knowing how do I genuinely make those relationships without having access to people that are different than me.
Yeah, and that's the hard part, because I've been fortunate enough to always just, or maybe that's just how it works for the opposite side, like it's more easy for me to be surrounded by white people, just because, you know, you just go anywhere. And so I actually, I don't know if I know the answer to that, or even if it's like frequenting a Starbucks that's in more of a diverse neighborhood. It's as simple as that. Just being kind of a staple there where they may not see as many white people. That is a hard part, and I don't have a very good answer.
No, yeah, and I don't expect you to give me an answer. I just, it's an interesting spot to be in because I have the desire. I'm just not quite sure how to make it happen. And the closest thing I can think is we have, I work for the state, and we have employee resource groups. And one of them is BEST, the Black Employee Support Team, I think it's called. And I had a really brief conversation with them a little while because I'm part of the Pride ERG, the Gay and Lesbian ERG. And so I had an opportunity to have that contact, and that's the closest I've gotten in years to being able to do something like that.
I mean, that's great.
Yeah, so I was thinking about, I don't know how to, you know, further that relationship, that bond, you know, whatever, but it feels like that's maybe a place I could go to.
There's a great professor at NYU I love called Jonathan Haidt. I don't know if you know his stuff. He wrote a book called The Coddling of the American Mind. Really, Glenn Beck loves him, has introduced me to him. But he has this concept that he says to people who live in the majority, and in this instance it would be white people, called anti-fragility, that says as you engage in these situations, because of the history, they are emotional. And that if you don't get the reaction you're looking for, to really try and adopt a mindset known as anti-fragility, saying that, okay, that's not really about me. I can take it personally, but that's about something systemic. And so that person may not be open. Let me try the next one. And he says this because a lot of times people will make efforts in with the best of intentions, and they'll get rebuffed, and then they feel like frustrated. And so what he says, and I lead a lot of these conversations, and most of them go well. Once in a while they don't, and I'll get upset and I'll get frustrated, and I'm like, okay, next, on to the next one. And I think this anti-fragility mindset, I say to myself a lot, you know, because again, as this is happening, I'm not Black. You know, even doing this, I'm like, are people looking at me and being like, what is he doing? Why is he doing this? He's not even part of the situation. Again, I just have to be a little bit anti-fragile, that if I don't get the response I want, or if you reach out to that organization and they're not interested, that you're like, okay, what's the next option? Because not everyone's going to be open. It's like if you go to a hospital and you want to visit patients, not every patient is open to that. You know, they're not in the right mood, they're in pain today, whatever. My husband runs a nursing home, which is why it came to mind, that when you go, sometimes people are like, I don't want your pity. And then I can either feel like, oh, what was wrong with me, my intention, or okay, that's that person, anti-fragile, next one. And I think that's something I would encourage my white friends, is that you're gonna get someone who says you're doing it wrong. I've gotten people saying I'm doing it wrong on all sorts of levels. It's the passion in your heart to say, but I'm going to make a difference anyway, and I'll try the next option and try the next option. Because without a doubt, you're going to have conversations about race that are going to spiral. In the same way that you have conversations about politics that spiral. Do we not have the conversations, or do we set ourselves up to be more immune to when it goes wrong? And I found that concept very helpful from Jonathan Haidt of anti-fragility, because absolutely, it blows up in my face from time to time. And I just sort of like, okay, I understand where that comes from. I have enough of awareness of the background to understand it. Good on you, your choice. Let me try another option. But that organization sounds very interesting, Laura. Like that's a really good place, especially because you work with the state anyway. Like it seems like a very good place to at least start the conversation.
Well, and it was interesting because the whole reason that we started having the conversation is because a lot of our foster kids, if we have Black foster kids, because we're such a white community, the foster parents don't know how to help them as far as skin care and hair care and that sort of thing. And one of my coworkers found one of those Christmas trees with the little tags where you get Christmas gifts for kids. And it was from like a 12-year-old girl who said she needed hair care products. And we're like, she shouldn't have to ask for that as a Christmas present. That should be available to her. And so some conversation started around that and how to help our foster parents understand, you know, culturally how to to be there better for the kids. And so we've had a little bit of conversation around that, and which is fantastic because it's definitely opening up a conversation that most of us haven't had before.
Yeah.
Susan, in terms of your world, what do you think in terms of what could be done, what you could do, what you'd like to do? Are there things that you feel like you'd like to talk about more? After this conversation, what are you thinking?
Oh, I'm just kind of chewing on it still. I mean, I want to get involved in, so what you said about the volunteering, I've done that before, just not in my current community. But I mean, my church is pretty much all white, and I don't feel like I kind of feel like Laura that, I mean, my community is much more diverse. It's a larger city, but I just don't interact with them. You know, there's not like a time, like most of the people that I work with are white, and just don't have a lot of opportunity. So it's just something I'm just kind of listening and thinking, like, how do I create the opportunity? Actually, we have the business resource groups too, Laura, that I was thinking I could get involved in something like that at my corporation, like the African American resource group. And although it might look kind of weird if I walk into one of their meetings, I don't know. I have no idea if they're all Black people or if there are anybody else, and I just walk in.
If they look at you funny, just be like, and?
Yeah.
And?
Someone's gonna have to walk in first.
I know. So I may try that.
And I guess, you know, Grace and I have many, many times in our lives been in that room where building a career, when I did, it was all white. And it was like, who just walked in? And I felt it. So I'm so used to being the only, because you get used to it. And then people talk about ethnicities and they're like, Riaz. And I'm like, oh yes, me, that's a me cue. So it is a little weird in the beginning, but it's not as scary as it seems. And I think it's so needed now. And I also think churches are a good way to reach out to a sister church or something, to ask your church if there's a way to connect churches together for sort of a social of some kind, because I find churches are very good community resources and tend to have relationships with other churches.
Yes, we do. And I think, you know, I think my fear, like what Laura was saying too, like, I don't want to seem disingenuous. And so it feels good to hear Grace say to do this stuff, because I sort of feel like if I do that, it will just come across as really like I'm trying too hard, you know, and fake. And, you know, are they going to trust me, or am I just going to come across as like virtue signaling or something? Like, so I have all these, that's kind of my thoughts, is just like, I just don't want to come across as disingenuous in any way.
If you go into it saying to yourself, you know what, they're not going to trust me at first, and because they may not really.
Yeah.
But I feel like even like everything that you said, like the consistency just eliminates all of those things. The disingenuous, if you're there for longer than a month, they'd be like, oh, the white girl's still here. That's so nice, you know? And it's like,
because they're so used to people doing this as the cause of the day. Like,
right. Yeah.
This parade of lack of sincerity. So if your real intention is sincere, don't let them take it away from you. Like, do and it will be a little bit uncomfortable. And I guess that's a way that you can connect to the experience of being a minority, is that it is sometimes uncomfortable for us. It really is. You know, I've been in rooms where they forget that I'm not white, and it comes out. And I'm like, I'm still here. So almost that discomfort, allow it to teach you a bit of what our mindset is. It means that it's a very good way to understand our experience, because you'll get through it. You're smart, you're clever, you'll get through it. But going through that is a learning experience that's very relatable to us, very relatable. And I think know your intention, because people will, and this is the thing that is just so crazy about social media, is everyone has an opinion and will blare it to you with complete certainty that they are right. It takes more conviction to be like, no, I have my own voice in my head, because it's really loud. And so just, if this is your conviction that there's something you want to do, I would do it. And any discomfort is a learning experience, and you will get there, because you will get their trust. But the trust comes through consistency and commitment. Yeah.
I appreciate that because I know for our LGBT resource group, we have straight allies that come and are there with us, and surprisingly to me, have continued to come to the meetings every month. So I guess that just proves out to me exactly what you're saying, that yeah, I just need to go do it and be consistent. And
the
yeah.
discomfort itself is not bad. You know, the inherent discomfort is not bad because it means you're exiting a place that you know really well and going to a place you don't know as well, which is going to inherently be a learning curve. And so I think we often put so much emphasis on the discomfort, which is valid, but it's part of it. It's part of the growth. It's good to be like, oh, I don't know how they're going to engage me. I don't know how they run their system. I don't know how this organization works. And being like, that's part of being out of your comfort zone, and being out of the majority is sort of like, oh, it's not my rules. Let me see how they do it. And I think that discomfort can be really, really educational and really useful. I mean, I went to rural Alaska and just sat at this rural diner and was like, I'm a gay liberal Muslim from Pakistan. Anyone want to talk? Anyone? And it was, and within 20 minutes, we were all chatting because I had such conviction in what I knew I was going in. You could tell me you voted for Trump and my eyes would not change. Because why? Just tell me why. Because I'm operating off of a system of beliefs and experiences that are particular to me. I cannot say what is best for a white fisherman in Ketchikan, Alaska, unless I talk to him. How could I possibly know? And so the discomfort is how we get to know each other. And we've lost that ability because it's becoming rarer and rarer to cross paths with strangers. And even like now, it's been like an hour or something, but there's no awkwardness, discomfort. I don't know how to ask Grace this. Grace doesn't. Like it's a lot of it's a fear in our mind. And I think if we embrace the anti-fragility and we embrace the discomfort, it's all going to be good. We're going to learn. We're going to learn.
Yeah. And the minute people, like, this may just be me, but like the minute people like constantly apologize for like, I don't mean to be rude when I ask this. I'm like, if you're coming from a good place, you don't have to apologize. Like, if someone gets offended, be like, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend you. Like, I'm coming from a good place, but like, don't start out by saying, don't take this the wrong way. Like, if your heart's good, like, it's coming from a good place, and let that be the thing. And yeah, because I'm like, you know, they're like, I'm not racist, I promise. But, and I'm like, well, wait.
I have had people ask me to my face, does my family own a 7-Eleven? And I have not been offended because of the way they asked it.
Mm-hmm.
It was true based on them watching Simpsons and this. They assumed that almost all brown people drive cabs or 7-Elevens. And I could tell by the way they asked in their eyes, they really didn't know.
They were really curious, yeah.
I didn't get triggered because it didn't have that edge. And when you're used to being, you can tell someone's intentions a mile away.
Yeah.
If you're on our side, which is that you got a lot of people coming out, you can tell it a mile away. And so when you come and they're like, I don't want to, I'm like, we're not even there. My mind is not even remotely close to being offended. But but the second your tone shifts and I start seeing your intentions, which is so clear to us to see, that's where I get offended. But no, it's most people will let it ride, and if they don't, just not the person to collaborate. Yeah. It's a different person.
Mm-hmm.
How do you all feel now? How do you all feel in terms of this, you know, we're not going to solve racism in an hour, but ideally
that's what I was expecting. So
I'm working on it. I'm trying. Like, the idea is just to bridge and to personalize and to say, like, and again, this is the beginning of a conversation. If something comes up in a week and you're like, this article came, I've done now 4 of these. All of those chat threads are buzzing all day long. I just saw this. Could you look at this? What is the statistic? I saw this. Oh, I never saw that one. It's the beginning of a bridge. A bridge has been built. Now utilize it. Because the thing that is necessary is all of us. This can't be figured out by one party, one group.
It's your phone. I want your phone.
Oh my God.
What's happening on
the table?
No.
Oh, sorry. It's here.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.
You missed the breakdown about the graham crackers that happened the second you were logging in.
It was awesome.
Cheers. I want her graham crackers. I want hers. I'm like, oh. Totally feel you. But how do you feel about this connecting? Because you're all strangers. You all have no connection to each other than arbitrarily putting you together. How did it feel?
I think it feels good. I think it's good to make those in-person connections. Yeah, I like it. It feels good.
Susan?
I think it's easier when you're strangers because you don't have anything to lose.
Mhm.
Worried about a friendship that's going to go south if I say something wrong or disagree, or even my family. I've got people in my family that I can hardly talk to. So I feel like there's less risk when it's strangers. It feels more comfortable. Like, all right, well, hopefully this goes well, but if not, like, I don't know these people. I'll never see them again. So I like that, but it went really well, and it's given me a lot to think about.
Okay, good. And I'll connect you all in a chat group so you can ask or whatever you want to convey to each other. But thank you all for trusting. I know these are very busy times, Grace. I know you're multitasking a lot as you're sitting on your balcony trying to get
Yes,
some
I
quiet.
tried to lock her out. She just doesn't care.
How old is she?
She's 6.
Aw. And thank you all for your honesty and for your vulnerability and for trying this. And again, I'll connect you all in a chat group so you can follow up with questions and stuff. But this is how we change it, just a little bit at a time, but moving it forward, not losing interest.
Yeah.
Thank you guys. I appreciate getting a chance to talk to all of you.
Yeah,
and taking the
thanks.
time to do that. So
Thank
Thank you, guys.
Bye, guys.
you.
Have a good weekend.
bye. You
All
too.